Joining me first is Ambassador John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor to President Trump, to discuss the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the Arab-Islamic summit in Doha, and the war in Ukraine. I'd just like to start off, Ambassador Bolton, by asking you, what's your reaction to the callous murder of Charlie Kirk?
Well, it's a terrible tragedy. It's for his family, obviously, but it's a stark reminder to the country as a whole that violence of any kind in a civil political society is unacceptable, and it applies whatever it is the speaker's saying, whether it's from the right or the left or whatever perspective you want to have. It's just not acceptable. We have a very highly partisan political environment now, and people need to remember that we should be arguing about ideas and policies and not about personalities. That's the way to get things calmed down and hopefully have a smoother, better civil discourse, which we definitely need.
Did you ever meet Charlie Kirk?
I never did, and it's evident that his death has touched a lot of people. So it's a tragic moment, but if people can learn appropriate lessons, maybe it could lead to a better future.
Within 72 hours of taking office, President Trump, he removed your security detail along with that of Mike Pompeo. Is your own personal safety a concern?
Well, necessarily, given that the reason that Pompeo and I and several others, former Secretary of Defense Esper, former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Milley, had security protection, even though we were no longer federal officials, was the threat from Iran. And that threat remains. Conceivably, it's worse today after the attack on Iran's nuclear weapons program, and the regime is dangerous enough that I think people should be concerned about it. We can see this pattern from Tehran and terrorist attacks all over Europe against members of the Iranian diaspora in the U.S. as well. So this is a terrorist regime. There's no doubt about it.
Is the Arab-Islamic summit in Doha, is it a diplomatic threat to Israel, or is it just more rhetoric?
Well, I think this is an opportunity for people to assess really the state of play in the Middle East and to remember ultimately what the real threats are. And the real threat remains the regime in Iran and its desire for hegemony in the region, politically and militarily, and its desire for hegemony within Islam. As I say, it's a terrorist regime. It is established terrorist proxy groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and it's engaged right now in a war with Israel that obviously just touched Doha a few days ago. So I understand the level of criticism of Israel, and I think you heard it from President Trump as well. The question is how to keep things on track for what I think responsible parties want, which is peace and security in the Middle East on a permanent basis. And we shouldn't let the events of the day, as much as they might attract our attention, distract us from strategically understanding where the real threats are. And they come from Iran, basically.
And at this summit, how seriously should the U.S. take calls from Iran and others to sever all ties with Israel?
You know, that was tried ever since Israeli independence in 1948, and it didn't work. It didn't work. The breakthroughs that have been achieved in the past several years to get diplomatic relations and peace between Israel and its neighbors are evidence of not just of political progress, but of real change in the region as a whole. Where I think in the Gulf Arab countries in particular, the view was essentially the same as Israel's, that the greatest threat to their peace and security came from Iran. That's what led to the Abraham Accords. That hasn't changed. If anything has changed in the region, it's that Iran and its proxies have now been weakened by the war they launched by the Hamas attack in October of 2023. weakened but not yet defeated. And I think considering what the change calculus of and the correlation of forces today is in the region says that we're all closer to achieving the objective of a sustainable peace, but we can't leave the rest of what needs to be done undone. Otherwise, in a short period of time, we could be right back into where we were on October 7th, which isn't helpful to anybody except the terrorists.
Does Israel strike on Qatar? Does it risk triggering a broader regional escalation? And how should the US respond?
Well, I think the risk is because obviously nobody in Qatar likes having violence occur in their capital city, of being carried away with the emotions of the moment and not seeing the longer term implications. I think there needs to be some consultation between Qatar and Israel. I'm sure it will be at first a very unpleasant meeting, and that's to be expected. But as my former boss, Secretary of State Jim Baker, used to tell me all the time, keep your eyes on the prize. And the prize here is not venting anger as justifiable as you may think it to be. The prize is dealing with the real threats to peace and security in the region, which stem from the revolution in Tehran.
Netanyahu hasn't ruled out further strikes on Hamas leaders after the Qatari attack, saying that they won't have immunity wherever they are. With the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he's now in Jerusalem. Can the US rein him in?
Well, I think that's what Rubio is probably telling Netanyahu, don't do it again, or at least don't do it again unless you give us the chance first to say we don't think it's a good idea. I have to tell you, thinking back to how the United States felt right after 9/11, if we had found Osama bin Laden in a conference room in some fancy hotel somewhere around the world, even if it was one of our allies, I'm not sure we would have stopped and let him get away. I'm not sure we wouldn't have gone ahead and tried to take him out in that conference room in that fancy hotel. I don't know. We didn't face that situation. But when you've been attacked by terrorists the way the U.S. was, the way Israel was, I think one can understand the perspective, even if the particular decision involved that people are worried about today may have been ill-advised. I think you can understand the logic behind the strike.
Turning to the war in Ukraine now, Russia has violated NATO airspace twice in 1 week. There's been drones in Poland, there's been drones in Romania. How should Europe respond?
Well, I think this is a question for NATO, not just the Europeans. I think it's just not credible to say, as Moscow has said, that these were accidents, the drones were off course. I think Putin has felt he has a free hand in Ukraine ever since the Alaska summit, unfortunately. I think these two drone incursions that you mentioned are tests, provocations. The Russians want to see how NATO reacts. And so far, the reaction has been rhetorical, which diplomats are good at. I think it needs to be much stronger, not just in economic terms, which Trump has suggested, but I think we need to take urgent steps to reestablish deterrence so that the Russians don't do this again. If you're living in Poland or the Baltic republics or anywhere near the Russian border, you're worried about what you see in Ukraine and now what we've seen in two NATO countries. So failing to take a very hard response here, I think just risks further provocations.
We're 3 years into the war in Ukraine. Is there an end in sight?
Well, I don't think so, unfortunately. Remember, Russia's objective here is to recreate the Russian Empire. Putin has said that repeatedly for the past 20 years. And they take a long-term view of it. They got 10% of Ukraine in 2014. They've got another 10% of it now, at an enormous human cost to Russia, to be sure. But their objective is long-term. And even if we were to get a ceasefire tomorrow, it would simply give the Russians an opportunity to regroup, to refit their army, and to consider how to go after Ukraine again. So this is something that I'm afraid was not handled well by NATO in the immediate aftermath of the Russian invasion in 2022. That's one reason why there's near gridlock on the battlefield today. But I don't think you can ever let this kind of unprovoked aggression go unanswered, because it's a matter not just in Ukraine. It sets a precedent in the Middle East. It sets a precedent for China along its Indo-Pacific periphery. There's a lot at stake here.
Ambassador John Bolton, thanks so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me.